Welcome to the Movie Business Podcast, picking up where Movie Business Book left off. I'm Jason Squire, hosting a wide range of industry talent and executives to answer fundamental questions about the business today. Here we go. And DIY distribution is the subject today with JON REISS, filmmaker, writer, and media strategist and author of Think Outside the Box Office. His company, Above, creates custom strategies and theatrical experiences for independent films. REISS has consulted with hundreds of filmmakers and film organizations globally, most recently for the LIBRARIANS documentary. In 2023, he created the Above Distribution Lab, teaching filmmakers distribution and marketing. Also, he's co-founder of the Future Film Coalition and writes about distribution and marketing on his Above Substack. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm so glad to finally be able to wrangle you onto the podcast for a special reason that I'll get to in just a little while. But let's begin by asking, what are the secrets of DIY distribution?
Well, I guess I could fill up the whole podcast with this, but I'll try not to. So the first secret is that it's not doing it yourself. I kind of more call it independent distribution because there's so much to do. Like if you made your film completely by yourself, shot it yourself, edited it yourself, etc., okay, then maybe you're distributing it yourself. But most people have crews because it's as much work to release a film, or nearly as much work to release a film as it is to make a film. And in some senses, it's harder to release a film. I kind of say that distribution is easy and marketing is hard, but I'm saying lately making a film is easy, but getting an audience to want to see it, that's the hard part. So it's best to work with other people. And I would say that's one of the secrets. The other secret would be to understand that you need to budget for distribution and marketing and plan for distribution and marketing. There aren't really companies that are going to come and offer you a big check and do the most wonderful release of the film that you've dreamed of them doing anymore. Those companies almost never existed for most filmmakers, 95% of filmmakers. Now they kind of exist for 0.1% of filmmakers. So it's really essential to be planning for distribution and marketing from the beginning, essentially from inception or as close to inception as possible, and to also be budgeting for it so that you're not at the end of production totally exhausted, have no idea what you're going to do, and not have any energy or time to distribute or connect your film to an audience.
Now, it's this kind of helpfulness that is found in your important book, Think Outside the Box Office. What drove you to write the book?
What drove me to write the book? It's kind of funny. So I'm a filmmaker, and I kind of got into this as a filmmaker because I had a film come out in Tribeca in 2007. It's when the market for independent film initially collapsed. It's currently going through a more severe collapse right now. And so when we screened it to 5 sold out 500-seat audiences, standing ovations, and we were thinking, oh, we're going to sell the film. And then a week later, the DVDs, because DVDs were still a thing back then, were for sale on Canal Street. And we had a bunch of no money offers for all rights for 25 years. And it's just, I said, F this, I can do this better, because I've been involved with distribution with nearly all of my projects in various ways since I got into this. So I created this hybrid path for the film, and people said, oh, we've never seen anyone do anything like this, so why don't you write about it for Filmmaker magazine? I wrote some articles, and people wanted to consult with me for like $25, let's put it that way. And I said, okay, I'm not going to do that, but I will write a book and sell it to you for $25. So that's what I did. I discovered that I had an ability to take a very complex system and to distill it down to the basic components in a way that filmmakers could follow, but also in a very step-by-step manner.
Yeah.
And so I basically turned that into a book. And now here I am 15 years later, where I am consulting on projects. I'm releasing films theatrically and also releasing films through their whole life cycle. But now I also have a distribution lab where I teach filmmakers how to do distribution and marketing and mentor them along the process. And then I also still write on my Substack, essentially updating the book in a sense.
Oh, well, that's great. This really is a landmark book in the field and categorized all the upheaval that was happening in independent film, where filmmakers could finally become their own distributors and use the web to reach audiences directly. It was a very big deal at the time and had a great impact on me. It provided the groundwork for my teaching about independent distribution, and that's why it's a special bonus for me to thank you on the podcast.
Oh, right. I'm very happy that I'm glad that it served that purpose. It does need to be rewritten, and I am in the process of rewriting it. I just laid out the table of contents and where I realized, oh, wow, this is quite different. A lot of the fundamentals are the same, like a lot of the fundamental principles, like every film is different. Every film and filmmaker is different, and hence every film needs its own unique plan. That's fundamental. Reclassifying film rights into what I call event theatrical, and then classifying all forms of digital into digital, not just separating out home video from VOD, from DVD and broadcast, and combining those, and emphasizing merchandise and educational distribution. Some of those constants are still there, but a lot of my approach has changed.
Well, that's remarkable. And yes, it is difficult to revise material, but so worthy a project. And you have an enormous readership eager to be brought up to date on all of these details. You really have been, and the generation of filmmakers who have since grown up in the digital space, making feature films, putting it out there, learning marketing as a result, learning distribution in addition to production. Now, let me ask you, how would you characterize the state of independent filmmaking and distribution today? You've already mentioned that things are not going so well.
It's complicated because there are ways to reach audiences, but the economics are not great, partially because the global streaming platforms basically destroyed the economic system that independent film was dependent on. And we're seeing further issues with the potential merger of Paramount and Warner Brothers. And if you're interested in that, I recommend going to the site blockthemerger.com. I also recommend going to the organization that I co-founded called the Future Film Coalition. The goal of that organization is to advocate for the economic survival of independent film and to provide pathways. And because what we find ourselves in is that there are great films being made, there are audiences that want to watch this film, but there's so many structural issues that have essentially been created by these conglomerates, not just on the production and distribution side, such as the streamers, but also on the audience attention side, such as Meta and TikTok, et cetera. There's a variety of predatory practices that happen from these conglomerates, and it makes it very difficult for independent film to find a sustainable place in the world. So that's what the purpose of the Future Film Coalition is.
So it has been said that streaming has opened the floodgates for independent films to be shown, have access to audiences. Isn't that a good thing in the continuum of technology impacting film?
No, not. Sorry to cut you off, but not really. Like, most people view streaming these days as subscription VOD, which are essentially the quote-unquote streamers of Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV, and not the Apple TV where you rent or buy. Those companies were buying product about 5 to 10 years ago, and there was this golden age, but I think that created this false sense of security amongst independent film that this would continue, and it has not continued. They stopped buying films similar to how they were. They were never buying enough films to make sense for all filmmakers, and it was now relatively dried up. I heard recently from someone that each of the streamers is essentially acquiring 2 films a year. I think that's maybe a little even small, but even if they acquired 10 films a year, most of them are absorbed with their own original productions, right? So they have data/algorithms that tell them what works for their platform or works for their shareholders, and they create their own content. partially because they're allowed to be vertically integrated, which is another structural issue that we have, that these streaming platforms are allowed to produce and distribute their own content. A number of 40 years ago, that would not have been allowed. So audiences subscribe to all these streaming platforms, and it's like, oh, there's so much content on there. Why do we need to rent something, for instance, which has caused a relative collapse, not for all titles, but for most titles, a collapse of a very strong former ancillary market, which was home video sales or rentals. So even digitally through Amazon Prime or on DVD or even on VHS, those were all very strong revenue generators for independent film. And that has disappeared now. So it makes it very difficult for filmmakers, independent filmmakers, to find a way to monetize their distribution. So in a sense, I would say the opposite, that streamers haven't helped independent film reach audiences or become sustainable or meet their goals. In fact, it has done the complete opposite. I read an article about 5 to 7 years ago where one of the heads of one of the streaming platforms said that we're going to destroy Hollywood within 5 years. And I was thinking, well, maybe 10 years. And they actually did it, I think, within 3 to 4 years.
Now, let me ask, for the somewhat grim tapestry that is unfolding for the independent world, do you see any green shoots?
Yes, I still feel that there's a path for every film. And it takes that much more purpose in creating a distribution and marketing strategy for your film. I think it also takes the understanding that monetization is difficult, especially if you're not thinking about who your audience is, and if you're not thinking about finding an underserved audience that wants to be spoken to. So the films that still can break out generally are those that serve those underserved audiences well, because there are films that still perform financially well, like The Librarians being an example of. Also in the documentary space, I would say No Other Land spoke to an entire group of people that were eager to have the story that they were seeing unfold across the world actually depicted honestly on screen. So because of the double-edged sword of the internet, it's created structural issues that make it more difficult for filmmakers to potentially monetize in the ways that they used to. And I'll caveat by saying that only serviced some filmmakers. But by the same token, there are tools available to filmmakers to engage audiences and to create their own direct distribution or independent distribution that weren't available before. Those would be some of the shoots that I see that are green. I also feel that having formed the Future Film Coalition and the fact that we've been able to form the organization and actually been one of the leaders of the movement, such as Block the Merger, that it shows that if we do organize around these issues, that there's power in that organizing.
Yes.
And that there's hope to be able to change some of the structural inequities that put independent filmmakers at a disadvantage.
Very good. And congratulations for doing that. And we'll follow the progress with real interest. So let's turn to a filmmaker. How can a filmmaker plan to follow your tradition?
Well, there's multiple ways. You can subscribe to my Substack, and that's the entry-level drug, as it were. But then if someone really wants to learn distribution and marketing, they can sign up for the Distribution Lab, which is a 6-month program. And we have people at all different stages, people at the script stage, people in the rough cut stage. It's usually better to have a project, but I even have been thinking lately that people who just want to learn about distribution and marketing, and they can basically, because it is project-based, they can kind of like create a project that they're going to create a distribution plan, even if they say they don't have a script, they can still learn how to do it. Like I find there's a very few professors, it seems like you teach this methodology at your school, but it's not really taught in many universities.
Yeah.
And I have my own theories about that. And then eventually when the new book comes out, read the book. But I would just say follow the Substack, see what you think, and then potentially join. We do the labs twice a year, and join one of the labs. And then you'll get a huge grounding in all aspects of distribution and marketing.
That sounds really good. Now, here's something I've been itching to ask you. What does 8 Above stand for?
Oh, well, before we get to that, the one thing I'll say, if you're interested in the lab, you can sign up on our website, on the 8 Above website. There's a page for the lab, and you can sign up for an info session. And that's how I explain to filmmakers what the lab is, and we meet, and I hear about your projects, et cetera. So where did 8 Above come from? We work with filmmakers in transition. And also, Magic Hour has always had a special meaning for films and filmmaking. So I found out that sunrise and sunset happens between 6 and 12 degrees above the horizon. And I chose the number 8 because it's the sign of infinity as well, and also a very lucky number in Asian cultures. And I figured, okay, it's 8 above. It's 8 above the horizon.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you. So finally, what's your prognosis for this part of the business, John?
I think it's good. I think the thing is, I highly recommend taking a look at Carrie Putnam's study. And we have a webinar on our Substack. And if you're just going to dabble in my Substack, I highly recommend checking that out.
And what is that study?
What Carrie's study shows is that there's a strong audience interest in independent film. But by the same token, there's a disconnect between the makers of independent film and those audiences. But what it shows is that there's enormous potential for filmmakers to reach audiences. We just have to get beyond a lot of those structural barriers. Some of them are imposed by conglomerates, and some of them are just friction pain points within the industry. So that is what I would say is hopeful, combined with the plethora of companies that are emerging to try to help solve this problem.
Good.
That's what I would say is hopeful. I also see that it's hopeful that there's more and more young people going to theaters. Mm-hmm. There's more and more young people buying DVDs. Mm-hmm. There's more and more young people who are sick of the fare that the streaming platforms are offering up to them, and that they really want to seek out challenging, interesting, and diverse content. So those are all hopefuls. And I would also say the other hopeful thing is that there's desire within the independent film ecosystem to fix this. Mm-hmm. So, and we're just getting started. So that's all of what I would say would be hopeful.
Well, that's a wonderful summary of what's going on. John, you've presented a terrific overview of the cutting edge of independent filmmaking, even in these challenging times, and giving us all hope. So I want to thank Jon Reiss for being such a wonderful guest on the Movie Business Podcast. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much, Jason. Thanks for having me on.